So here's a big question. How did Kashmir, a place that for literally thousands of years was a heartland of Hindu spirituality, become a predominantly Muslim region? It's a question that gets right to the core of its incredibly complex history. All right, let's get into it. This is a story of transformation, and it's not just one single event. It unfolds over centuries through these encounters. Some of them were gentle, some were super pragmatic, and yeah, some were pretty brutal.
And what's so fascinating, what you might not expect, is that this huge shift didn't kick off with an invasion. Nope. The first seeds of Islam in the valley were actually planted peacefully. They were carried by these wandering mystics, and their message of divine love just found really fertile ground in a land that was already so rich with its own deep spiritual traditions. So, this brings us to that quiet arrival of the Sufis. Now, these guys weren't conquerors. Not at all. They were poets, they were thinkers, they were teachers who brought their faith to Kashmir through conversation and devotion. And they struck a chord that would, believe it or not, resonate all the way to the very top. And the key figure in this whole first chapter is a man named Bulbul Shah. Just picture this charismatic Sufi mystic showing up from Persia. He wasn't there demanding that people convert. He was teaching a message about a universal divine love that, funnily enough, sounded a lot like the valley's own Shaiva traditions. His whole approach was about gentle persuasion, and it got the attention of someone who was about to change Kashmir's destiny forever. And that someone was a guy named Rinchen. He was a Buddhist prince who just seized the throne, but he was an outsider, right? So he needed a way to make his rule legit. Now, the story goes that he was turned off by the rigid Hindu caste system, and then he heard Bulbul Shah's message of equality, and something just clicked. His conversion, well, it was probably part spiritual, but it was also a super smart political move. By becoming Sultan Sadruddin, he didn't just change his own faith. He basically swung the door wide open for Islam to become a real political force in Kashmir. I love this because it paints such a clear picture of what those early days were like. It wasn't about conflict. It was about connection. You had these incredible moments of exchange, a Pundit family and a Sufi mystic just finding common ground, seeing the same search for the divine in each other. And that mutual respect created this really unique blended culture that, for a while, was the very spirit of the valley. But that period of sort of quiet harmony, it was followed by a massive political shift. This is where a spiritual encounter turns into a complete change in who's in charge, and it marks the end of more than 1,000 years of continuous Hindu rule. And what's really remarkable is just how fast it all happened. So in 1320, we get the first Muslim ruler. Less than 20 years later, in 1339, a trusted minister named Shamir betrays the last Hindu sovereign, Queen Kotarani. And instead of submitting to him, she makes this tragic choice to take her own life. It's just a really poignant and defiant end to an entire era of Hindu leadership that went back for ages.
Now, Shamir, he established the first real, lasting Islamic sultanate. But he was a smart guy. He was very pragmatic. He knew he needed stability to actually rule the place. So, what did he do? The new dynasty kept skilled Kashmiri Pandits in all the key government jobs. They were the ones who knew how to run the state, right? For the first few decades, there weren't widespread forced conversions. And all this new trade brought a lot of prosperity to the valley.
And then, out of this new dynasty, comes this truly remarkable figure, a king whose time on the throne is remembered as a golden age of harmony and tolerance. And it's such a sharp contrast to what came before and what would tragically come after.
His actual name was Sultan Zainul Abidin, but to all his people, and I mean everyone, regardless of their faith, he was known as Bud Shah, the Great King. I mean, that title alone tells you everything you need to know about the kind of reverence he inspired across all communities. He wasn't just seen as a Muslim ruler, he was the king of all Kashmiris. And wow, did his actions back up the title. He didn't just, stop the persecution, he actively worked to reverse it. Look at this list. He got rid of the discriminatory jizya tax. He funded the rebuilding of Hindu temples that had been destroyed. He personally invited exiled Pundit families to come back home, promising them safety. He even banned cow slaughter as a gesture of respect for his Hindu subjects. This wasn't just tolerance. This was a deliberate, full-on project of reconciliation.
Can you just picture it? The bustling markets in Srinagar, a Pandit jeweler working right next to a Muslim calligrapher, their arts just blending together. Festivals where Hindus and Muslims are out celebrating in the streets together. For this one shining generation, this incredible cultural fusion, it wasn't just some nice idea. It was real, it was daily life.
But that harmony, as beautiful as it was
Well, it turned out to be incredibly fragile. The story of Kashmir seems to be one of these cycles, and the light of Bud Shah's reign was followed by the return of a much, much darker and more intolerant vision for the valley.
And that brings us to Sultan Sikandar, a name that brings up a very different kind of memory. He became known as Butch Khan, which literally means the idol breaker. He unleashed this campaign of religious purification and ordered the destruction of Kashmir's ancient temples, including the magnificent Martan Sun Temple. You can still see its ruins today, a silent witness to all that fury.
The contrast is it's night and day. You've got two rulers, two totally opposite paths for Kashmir. Bud Shah gets rid of the jizya tax, Sikandar brings it back with a vengeance. Bud Shah rebuilds temples, Sikandar smashes them. One invited pundits to come home, the other forced them to run for their lives. It's this powerful and frankly tragic picture of the two futures that were possible.
And this is the human cost. This is what it all comes down to. It's not just about politics or broken stones. It's about families having to make these impossible choices. A father deciding the only way to protect his kids and his faith is to flee the land his family has known for thousands of years, packing up ancient books, joining caravans of other desperate people, and trekking over frozen mountains, leaving it all behind.
Which leaves us with this question, right? Bud Shah's reign, it shows us that a different path wasn't just a fantasy, it was once a reality. It proves that real reconciliation, mutual respect, that's all part of Kashmir's DNA too. So you have to wonder, can that 15th century model of a great king who healed divides and celebrated what everyone shared, can it offer any lessons for the enormous challenges of reconciliation that Kashmir is facing right now? It really makes you think.